Hello, Make It Yourselfers. Today I am going to share how to make some egg wraps. This is a really simple recipe. In the past, when I did a lot more paleo recipes, I showed you how to make a lot of different types of gluten-free wraps. And I made the paleo pitas that were with tapioca flour. I also made some wraps that were just flaxseed and others that were flaxseed with egg. I started with the ones with the flaxseed and eggs, and then I had a friend who could not tolerate eggs, and I thought, I wonder if this can be made. While those are all fine and, they're good keto options, I had issues with oxalates and I have changed my diet somewhat. And I was really actually surprised how easy it was to make a nice egg wrap with just egg, nothing else. Now, I know you can buy commercially made egg wrap type products in certain countries. I can't find anything like that here in Spain, but they usually include things like gelatin or other ingredients to try to make these wraps more pliable. And while you can do that sort of thing at home, through trial and error, I found that it really doesn't make much difference, and it's so easy to just whip these up with eggs. And it's really quite surprising, but they are very pliable, they hold things really well, and there is no reason to have to add any sort of filler to this. And again, I was so surprised when I could make the flaxseed wraps with only flax seeds and water. And in this case, you can make an egg wrap with just one egg. I make these so often in the evening when I'm looking for like a quick dinner, and really you can make them on the spot. I generally make 2 to 3 per person, and I will accompany it with some ground beef for a really quick dinner. To mine, I just use plain ground beef. For the rest of the family, I generally add a bit of tomato paste, and I do have a recipe for tomato paste on the blog, so you can make your own and know what exactly is going in it. But to them, I add a little bit of cumin and a little bit of garlic and onion and some of these things that I don't tolerate as well. But you can also make a type of fajita. I've also made carnitas with roasted pork, and I also have a recipe for that up on the blog that I want to be updating again soon. You can actually use it for sweet recipes too. You could fill it with cheese, make a sort of quesadilla. I don't like it as much. When you make it like that, it tastes more like a cheese omelet. You can add some cheese, fold it over, melt it in there, cut it up, and eat it in pieces, but it doesn't feel like you're eating a quesadilla. But on the other hand, when you fill it with things like ground beef or any sort of like shredded beef, shredded pork, I really don't notice it that much. And I'm not a person who enjoys eggs very much. I've told you this in the past. I can't stand hard-boiled eggs. I won't eat fried eggs or poached, any of those. I don't like eggs in any other way other than I have eaten them raw in smoothies and that sort of thing, and in an omelet. But when you make this wrap, you really are noticing more the flavors that go inside of it. The texture is a bit different than, obviously, a flour tortilla or a corn tortilla, but it really holds up well. It's very pliable, it's very flexible, it doesn't break. You can make them ahead and store them in the fridge, but they don't keep very well for very long. Maybe a couple of days. I reheat it in a skillet. I like it best that way. You could probably reheat it in the microwave if you use a microwave. But after several days, you'll notice it will start to change in its odor, and then I try to make sure that it doesn't get too far past, and I usually break it up and throw it to my hens at that point. I'm going to share some of my tricks and tips for doing this, because I know in the past I had tried to make just a simple egg wrap, and I was having issues with it sticking or not getting the right thickness. What I have found works really well, I avoid nonstick coatings, but I use a cast iron skillet. One of the mistakes that I've made in the past is not heating it long enough before I start. I get impatient, I whip up that first egg, and it will generally stick. So to make sure it doesn't stick, you really want to make sure that that pan is fully heated and as evenly as possible. That's why I like to start it up and I put it on the lower heat, the 4 setting on mine, and then I let it heat up for several minutes. Once I'm ready to start, I will use a spatula to grease my pan. I generally use either tallow or some leftover bacon fat, whatever I happen to have at the moment. I do a lot of beef fat in the air fryer or bacon and that sort of thing, and I save the fat that liquefies and I use that for cooking. I don't find that I need to grease the pan every single time between every single one, and if you do add too much of the layer of fat, you'll find that it's much harder to get your egg to spread out evenly. So I like to add a very thin layer, and then I don't re-grease between every single egg wrap. What I generally do is make 2 to 3, and then I will try to add a very thin layer again. Again, if you put too much, you'll find that the egg will start floating in that, and it's very hard to get it to stick to the pan and swirl it around evenly. You want it to stick enough so that you can spread it out, but you don't want it to stick so much that you can't flip it later. You want to make sure that you whip up the eggs really well. I usually use just 1 egg for each wrap, because I don't like these wraps to be thick. I like it to be nice and thin. I find that even when I fill it up with quite a bit of ground beef, I don't have problems with it breaking, and it's very easy to fold and it holds up well. You know, if you find that 1 egg isn't enough, you don't have to jump up to 2 eggs. What I like to do is to take some small bowls. I find that the eggs from my hen Shadow are a little bit bigger and they're the perfect size for wraps. But some of the other ones, like Ruby, she lays a smaller egg. When I make hers, sometimes it's just a little bit too little for the amount that I want for my pan. So what I like to do is I will take another small egg and I will beat that up, and I will divide that mixture amongst maybe 4 to 5 other wraps. So instead of jumping up to like 2 eggs for each wrap, you can just use the perfect amount for the size wrap that you like. And for me, I find that that's a good amount. I'll use maybe 1 1/5 eggs of the smaller ones, or 1 of Shadow's larger eggs, and that makes the perfect wrap for me. And if you bake it too thick, that's when it starts to taste eggy. That's when you notice the difference in texture. But if you make these thin enough, you really don't notice, and at least I don't. I enjoy them. The whole family likes them. Even my son, who is quite a bit of an addict for flour tortillas, and he has me whip them up for him quickly sometimes for a quick lunch. And he's trying to cut down on his excess white flours. He still is not completely avoiding them. But in the cases where it's not a big jump from one thing to another, he's making those changes. I'm happy to make those for him, and I prefer that he eats something like this. Once you've beaten the egg, you've greased your skillet, what you want to do is pour the egg mixture into the prepared skillet, and then as quickly as possible, take it and swirl it around in the pan. You want to get it as even as possible. I generally pour it in the center of the pan and then swirl to the edges. And then I keep swirling around those edges, and that builds them up a bit more. I find that they break much less easily if I have the thicker edges, and I concentrate more on that than the center part. Plus, the center part automatically has most of the mixture just because that's where you pour it and it starts to cook. The egg starts to set up. Once you swirled the beaten egg around your skillet as best you can, you just want to set the pan down and let it to continue to heat up for maybe a minute or 2. It really is going to depend on your heat source and how well you've heated up the skillet. And you'll start to notice that along the edges, it will start to release. And you want to wait till that point. If you try to pull it up too quickly, it's very likely that you'll break them. And while it's actually quite easy to fix, I have completely ripped many reps in the past, and I have been able to fix them by patching them together with some more beaten egg. It's best and easiest and quickest if you just get it right from the beginning. So try not to be impatient. I'm one of these impatient type people, so I have screwed this up many times in the past from impatience. So learn from my mistakes. Now that I'm much more patient with the process, I've learned from my mistakes. It goes so much easier. I look for the edges starting to separate a bit. And you can use your spatula to just separate it a bit. Try to get around all the edges. And you want everything to look as cooked as possible on the top. If you have a lot of liquid egg on the top, you're going to have a much harder time flipping it, and you're much more likely to break it. So you just want to be patient, wait for it to start to separate, wait for the egg to be mostly set, and then very carefully go around all of the edges, make sure that it's quite separate, and then you can flip it over. Now, some people don't bother flipping this type of thing. You can just cook it on the one side. I just like the texture better when I cook both sides. That second side, I only leave it for maybe half a minute at the most. You don't need to leave it very long because it's generally fully cooked once you flip it. Other tips, note that if it's starting to get golden brown, you're kind of on the higher side of the heat. I personally like a lighter wrap, not one that's getting on the darker side, but the real issue with having the heat too high is that your egg mixture will bubble up, so you won't get an evenly formed egg wrap. And so you're going to want to turn the heat down when you see that happening. If you do get these bubbles, you can pop them and fix them with a little bit of beaten egg white. And if you're taking 5 to 6 minutes to cook that first side, while you can do that if you have the patience for that, but I suggest turning the heat up just a little bit. Once you've experimented a bit more, you will find the best settings for your stovetop and your pan. And this will vary from pan to pan. It's pretty quick and easy to figure it out. And once you know, you can use the perfect heat setting for your stove and pan, and you can whip these out really quickly. Like I said, I can usually whip out at least 6 of them while I am making the ground beef, and then we have something to wrap up, and it's kind of like a taco. And I like having simple meals, but I'm not the type of person who could just eat ground beef on a plate. I know I've seen a lot of bloggers who will do this, especially meat-based bloggers, but it's not something that I personally enjoy. But when it's wrapped up, for some reason the whole thing changes, and I quite like eating ground beef that way. Once you have those set up, you can stack them on a plate and just bring them out with your ground beef, and then each person can wrap it up just like a tortilla. I struggled at the beginning to try to get it right. Now I can quickly whip up a stack without any issues. I hope you give them a try and let me know how you like them. Until next time.